I thought the storm was the danger. The whiteout, the freezing dark, the silence that swallowed the road whole. But the storm wasn't what trapped me. It was what arrived after. When my car died and the wind erased the world, I believed I was alone, until I stepped outside and saw footprints circling my car. Not approaching, not leaving, just waiting. This is not a story about survival. This is a story about what finds you when there's nowhere left to run.
Chapter 1.
Chapter 1. This should have been a safe drive. The road was familiar enough that he barely looked at it anymore. Evan Mercer drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely near the heater controls, eyes drifting between the gray ribbon of asphalt and the blurred wall of pines rushing past his headlights. He knew every curve, every shallow dip, every place where the snow drifted a little higher than usual. He had driven this road 100 times before, in daylight, at night, in rain, sleet, and early winter snow. That thought, "I'd driven this road 100 times before," settled in his mind like a comfort blanket. It was the reason he hadn't turned back an hour ago when the sky darkened too quickly. The reason he hadn't stopped when the wind began pushing the car sideways. Familiarity made danger feel smaller than it was. The clock on the dashboard glowed 8:47 p.m. Late, but not dangerously so. The storm had been a footnote in the weather report that morning. Light snowfall expected in rural areas. Nothing worth rearranging plans over. Nothing worth fearing. Evan had smiled at that forecast earlier, tugging on his coat, already half thinking about the quiet cabin waiting at the end of the drive. Now the snow fell harder. It thickened in the beam of the headlights, flakes streaking sideways like ash caught in a wind tunnel. The world beyond the windshield began to lose its edges. Trees blended together. The sky pressed down lower, darker, until it felt like the road was tunneling through something heavy and suffocating. Evan turned up the radio. Static answered him. He frowned and adjusted the dial. The familiar station flickered in and out, music warping, voices stretching thin, before dissolving back into white noise. He topped the console once, as if the car itself were at fault. "Come on," he muttered. The static hissed steadily, indifferent. His phone sat in the cup holder, screen dark. He picked it up, thumb brushing the side. No signal, not even a bar. That wasn't unusual this far out, he told himself. The towers didn't reach deep into the forest. He knew that. Still, he set the phone face up, as if daring it to light up. The wind struck the car harder. Snow slapped against the windows with dull, hollow thuds. Evan eased his foot off the accelerator, watching the speedometer dip. The tires hummed differently now, a subtle change in sound that made his shoulders tense despite himself. The road markings faded beneath the snow. Not gone, just quieter, muted, like someone had turned the contrast down on the world. Evan swallowed and leaned forward slightly, peering through the glass. His breath fogged the windshield almost immediately, forcing him to wipe it away with the back of his glove. The heater blew lukewarm air that smelled faintly of dust and old fabric. The forest felt closer than it should have. Pines crowded the roadside, their branches heavy with snow, bending inward like spectators. The darkness between them seemed deeper than the night sky above, thick and layered, as if something could hide there indefinitely and never be seen. "I'd driven this road 100 times before." He repeated it silently like a charm. The radio crackled again. For half a second, a voice pushed through the static, too warped to understand, stretched and wrong, before vanishing before white noise. Evan flinched, hand tightening on the wheel. "Stupid storm," he said, louder this time. The car rounded a gentle bend, one he knew well, and for a brief moment the road opened up ahead of him. Evan felt a small surge of relief. The snow eased, the wind softened, the world steadied, as if the storm had taken a breath. He exhaled without realizing he had been holding it. Then the lights flickered, just once, a quick dimming, like a blink. The dashboard glowed weakly before returning to normal. Evan's heart skipped, then resumed its rhythm, a little faster than before. "Don't do that," he whispered to the car. Another mile passed, maybe two. Time felt slippery, stretched thin by the monotony of white and black and gray. The storm pressed in again, heavier now, more deliberate. Snow erased the edges of the road completely, turning the world into a narrow tunnel of light and motion. The wind howled, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a constant, patient force, as if testing the car's resolve. Evan eased his foot off the accelerator. The sense of normalcy began to fray, not break, just loosen, the kind of unease that crept in quietly, without permission. He told himself it was nothing more than weather and nerves. Cold logic insisted he was fine, prepared, experienced, but instinct whispered something else. The radio hissed, the phone stayed dark, the forest leaned closer. Somewhere ahead, the road dipped into a shallow valley, a place where snow always collected deeper than expected. Evan remembered that, too. He adjusted his grip, eyes narrowing as he approached. The car descended, the wind surged, and for the first time since leaving the highway, a thought crossed his mind that felt heavier than all the others combined. This should have been a safe drive. The road did not answer. The storm swallowed the headlights, and Evan drove on, unaware that this was the last moment the night would feel even remotely familiar.
Chapter 2.
Chapter 2. The storm closed the world. The storm did not arrive all at once. It thickened. It gathered itself. Snow fell harder, faster, until the air seemed crowded with it. The headlights no longer cut through the night. They drowned in it. Beams reduced to pale smears, swallowed almost instantly. Evan leaned forward again, squinting, jaw tight. "I couldn't see 10 feet ahead." The phrase formed uninvited in his mind, repeating with every blink. He lifted his foot off the gas, then eased it back down, searching for the right balance between moving too fast and not moving at all. The road had narrowed into something uncertain, its edges erased. There were no lines anymore, no shoulders, just a suggestion of direction, fading with each second. The wind rose. It didn't scream, it pressed. Snow slammed into the hood and windshield, rattling like handfuls of gravel thrown again and again. The sound filled the cabin, constant and close, as if the storm were leaning in, breathing against the glass. Evan's hands ached around the steering wheel. He flexed his fingers, then tightened them again, afraid to let go. The car felt smaller now, fragile, a thin shell moving through something vast and indifferent. The forest vanished. Not gradually, not politely. One moment there were trees, dark shapes pressing in on both sides, and the next there was nothing but white. No trunks, no branches, no depth, just a wall of moving snow that erased distance entirely. I couldn't see 10 feet ahead. The windshield wipers worked furiously, squeaking with effort, but they only smeared the world into softer shapes. Evan adjusted them, then adjusted them again, chasing clarity that never came. The radio hissed louder, static rising and falling like breath. He turned it off. The silence was worse. Without the radio, every sound sharpened. The grind of tires against packed snow, the dull thud of wind battering the doors, the faint ticking of the engine as it worked harder, strained by cold and resistance. The dashboard clock read 9:03 p.m. Only 16 minutes had passed since he'd last checked. It felt longer. Evan slowed further, pulse ticking in his throat. He searched for landmarks he knew should be there. A crooked sign, a break in the trees, the shallow ditch that ran alongside the road for half a mile. None of them appeared. The road dipped slightly. Or maybe it didn't. It was impossible to tell anymore. The ground ahead blurred into the falling snow. Depth flattened into nothing. Evan felt the unsettling sensation of driving into a blank page. I couldn't see 10 feet ahead. The storm closed in tighter, visibility shrinking until the headlights illuminated only chaos. Snowflakes spun and collided, moving in conflicting directions as if the storm couldn't decide where to push next. Evan's breath fogged the windshield again. He wiped it away with shaking fingers, heart thudding faster now. A sliver of panic slipped through his careful calm. Okay, he told himself, to keep moving. Stopping in a storm like this was dangerous. Everyone knew that. Movement meant warmth, control, purpose. He repeated those words internally, clinging to them as the world outside unraveled. Then the road vanished. Not faded, vanished. The car rolled forward into a space where asphalt should have been, tires crunching over something uneven. Evan reacted instinctively, jerking the wheel, heart lurching as the car slid slightly before catching again. He slammed the brakes. The car skidded, then stopped. Snow swirled violently in the headlights, revealing nothing solid beyond the hood. No road, no ditch, no trees, just white, churning emptiness. Evan sat frozen on hands locked on the wheel, listening to his own breathing. Each inhale sounded too loud. Each exhale felt stolen. He leaned forward, peering out. Nothing. He opened the driver's side window an inch. The wind forced its way in immediately, sharp and cold, carrying snow with it. The smell hit him then, clean but biting, metallic and raw. The smell of deep cold and isolation. He slammed the window shut. The car idled uncomfortably beneath him, a living thing unsure of its footing. Evan glanced in the rearview mirror. The world behind him was gone, too. The storm had erased direction entirely. Ahead and behind looked the same, featureless white swallowing darkness. The forest that should have framed the road had been wiped away, as if it had never existed. I couldn't see 10 feet ahead. Now he wasn't sure he could see 5. A wave of disorientation washed over him, subtle but dangerous. Without reference points, his sense of movement faltered. He no longer trusted that the car was straight or level or even on the road at all. Evan reached for his phone again. Still nothing. No bars, no emergency alerts, just a dark screen reflecting his own pale face back at him. For the first time, a deeper fear took hold, not of crashing, not of freezing, but of something quieter. The fear of being erased, of existing in a place where the world could no longer see him. The storm didn't just surround the car, it wrapped it, smothered it. Sound, sight, direction, time, all blurred together under the relentless fall of snow. Evan swallowed hard. He eased his foot off the brake. The car rolled forward cautiously, inch by inch, as if feeling its way through blindness. The headlights showed only more snow, endlessly replenishing, endlessly falling. The storm had closed the world, and somewhere in that closing, Evan felt the first unmistakable sense that he was no longer traveling through the night. He was trapped inside it. The car crept onward, swallowed with white, as the storm tightened its grip and refused to let the road exist anymore.
Chapter 3.
Chapter 2. The Storm Closed the World. The storm did not arrive all at once. It thickened. It gathered itself. Snow fell harder, faster, until the air seemed crowded with it. The headlights no longer cut through the night, they drowned in it, beams reduced to pale smears, swallowed almost instantly. Evan leaned forward again, squinting, jaw tight. I couldn't see 10 feet ahead. The phrase formed uninvited in his mind, repeating with every blink. He lifted his foot off the gas, then eased it back down, searching for the right balance between moving too fast and not moving at all. The road had narrowed into something uncertain, its edges erased. There were no lines anymore, no shoulders, just a suggestion of direction, fading with each second. The wind rose. It didn't scream, it pressed. Snow slammed into the hood and windshield, rattling like handfuls of gravel thrown again and again. The sound filled the cabin, constant and close, as if the storm were leaning in, breathing against the glass. Evan's hands ached around the steering wheel. He flexed his fingers, then tightened them again, afraid to let go. The car felt smaller now, fragile, a thin shell moving through something vast and indifferent. The forest vanished. Not gradually, not politely. One moment there were trees, dark shapes pressing in on both sides, and the next there was nothing but white. No trunks, no branches, no depth, just a wall of moving snow that erased distance entirely. I couldn't see 10 feet ahead. The windshield wipers worked furiously, squeaking with effort, but they only smeared the world into softer shapes. Evan adjusted them, then adjusted them again, chasing clarity that never came. The radio hissed louder, static rising and falling like breath. He turned it off. The silence was worse. Without the radio, every sound sharpened, the grind of tires against packed snow, the dull thud of wind battering the doors, the faint ticking of the engine as it worked harder, strained by cold and resistance. The dashboard clock read 9:03 p.m. Only 16 minutes had passed since he'd last checked. It felt longer. Evan slowed further, pulse ticking in his throat. He searched for landmarks he knew should be there, a crooked sign, a break in the trees, the shallow ditch that ran alongside the road for half a mile. None of them appeared. The road dipped slightly, or maybe it didn't. It was impossible to tell anymore. The ground ahead blurred into the falling snow, depth flattened into nothing. Evan felt the unsettling sensation of driving into a blank page. I couldn't see 10 feet ahead. The storm closed in tighter, visibility shrinking until the headlights illuminated only chaos. Snowflakes spun and collided, moving in conflicting directions, as if the storm couldn't decide where to push next. Evan's breath fogged the windshield again. He wiped it away with shaking fingers, heart thudding faster now. A sliver of panic slipped through his careful calm. Okay. He told himself to keep moving. Stopping in a storm like this is dangerous. Everyone knew that. Movement meant warmth, control, purpose. He repeated those words internally, clinging to them as the world outside unraveled. Then the road vanished. Not faded, vanished. The car rolled forward into a space where asphalt should have been, tires crunching over something uneven. Evan reacted instinctively, jerking the wheel, heart lurching as the car slid slightly before catching again. He slammed the brakes. The car skidded, then stopped. Snow swirled violently in the headlights, revealing nothing solid beyond the hood. No road, no ditch, no trees, just white, churning emptiness. Evan sat frozen on the wheel, listening to his own breathing. Each inhale sounded too loud. Each exhale felt stolen. He leaned forward, peering out. Nothing. He opened the driver's side window an inch. The wind forced its way in immediately, sharp and cold, carrying snow with it. The smell hit him then, clean but biting, metallic and raw, the smell of deep cold and isolation. He slammed the window shut. The car idled uncomfortably beneath him, a living thing unsure of its footing. Evan glanced in the rearview mirror. The world behind him was gone too. The storm had erased direction entirely. Ahead and behind looked the same, featureless white, swallowing darkness. The forest that should have framed the road had been wiped away, as if it had never existed. I couldn't see 10 feet ahead. Now he wasn't sure he could see 5. A wave of disorientation washed over him, subtle but dangerous. Without reference points, his sense of movement faltered. He no longer trusted that the car was straight or level or even on the road at all. Evan reached for his phone again. Still nothing. No bars, no emergency alerts, just a dark screen reflecting his own pale face back at him. For the first time, a deeper fear took hold, not of crashing, not of freezing, but of something quieter. The fear of being erased, of existing in a place where the world could no longer see him. The storm did not just surround the car, it isolated it, wrapped it, smothered it. Sound, sight, direction, time all blurred together under the relentless fall of snow. Evan swallowed hard. He eased his foot off the brake. The car rolled forward cautiously, inch by inch, as if feeling its way through blindness. The headlights showed only more snow, endlessly replenishing, endlessly falling. The storm had closed the world. And somewhere in that closing, Evan felt the first unmistakable sense that he was no longer traveling through the night. He was trapped inside it. The car crept onward, swallowed by white, as the storm tightened its grip and refused to let the road exist anymore.
Chapter 4.
Chapter 4. I stepped outside because I had to. Evan stayed inside the car as long as he could. He told himself it was smart, logical. The car was shelter. Thin, fragile shelter, but better than nothing. He kept his hands tucked beneath his arms, shoulders hunched, breath slow and deliberate. The storm continued its relentless work outside, battering the metal shell from every direction. Time passed. Or something like it did. His toes burned, then went numb. His fingers followed. The cold crept inward with quiet patience, seeping through seams and cracks, claiming territory inch by inch. Evan shifted again, jaw tight, fighting the urge to panic. Stay put, he told himself. That's what you're supposed to do. But the waiting had changed. The sounds outside no longer felt random. The wind still howled, yes, but beneath it was something else. A rhythm, a pressure. As if the storm had learned where he was and decided not to move on. The car rocked slightly, just once. Evan froze. His heart slammed hard against his ribs, each beat loud enough to feel. He strained to listen, breath shallow, ears ringing with blood and fear. Nothing followed. Minutes crawled by. The cold tightened its grip. His thoughts grew sluggish, fuzzy at the edges. He recognized the warning signs from articles and late-night documentaries. Hypothermia didn't announce itself loudly. It whispered. It convinced you to sit still, to rest, to give up. Evan swallowed and made a decision. He needed to move. Not far, just enough. He needed to check the exhaust, clear snow from around the car, make sure he wasn't sealing himself inside a frozen tomb. Survival logic pushed past fear, sharp and insistent. "I'll be quick," he whispered to no one. His hand trembled as he reached for the door handle. The moment he cracked the door open, the storm rushed in. Wind screamed through the gap, sharp and biting, stealing heat instantly. Snow blew sideways into the car, stinging his face, dusting the seat and floor. Evan grimaced,
and forced the door wider. The sound changed immediately. Inside the car, everything was muted. Outside, the storm was enormous. The wind roared, a constant living thing that wrapped around him and shoved hard. Snow blasted his coat and filled his vision, flakes colliding and spinning wildly in the headlights' faint glow. Evan stepped down. The crunch of snow beneath his boot was shockingly loud. It echoed in his ears, sharp and final, as if announcing his presence to the night. He paused, heart hammering, listening for a response. None came. He took another step. Crunch. Another. Crunch. Each movement felt deliberate, exaggerated. The snow was deeper than he expected, nearly to his shins, resisting every step. Cold seeped through his boots immediately, numbing his feet. The smell of the storm hit him full force, clean, metallic, and suffocating. The air burned his lungs with each breath. Evan circled the front of the car, one hand sliding along the hood to keep his bearings. The headlights were barely more than suggestions now, swallowed by falling snow. Beyond them, the world ceased to exist. He reached the front grille and crouched, brushing snow away with stiff fingers. The cold bit viciously at his exposed skin. He worked quickly, breath puffing white in frantic bursts. The wind shifted. For a moment, a single fragile moment, the snowfall eased. Evan straightened instinctively, eyes scanning the ground around the car. And that was when he saw it. The snow near the driver's side door wasn't smooth. It wasn't wind-sculpted or drifted naturally. It was disturbed, pressed down in shallow depressions that curved gently through the white. Evan's breath caught. He took a step closer, squinting through the snow. The wind surged again, trying to obscure the view, but the shapes remained. Footprints. They circled the car. Not deep, not rushed, each one placed carefully, evenly spaced, forming a loose ring around the vehicle. Evan turned slowly, following them with his eyes. They didn't lead to the road. They didn't lead away. They simply existed. His heart pounded so hard it made him dizzy. He backed away from the tracks, boots crunching loudly, and nearly slipped. Panic flared, hot and immediate, but he forced himself to breathe. "This isn't happening," he whispered. The storm howled in response. Evan scanned the white void beyond the headlights, pulse screaming in his ears. The forest should have been visible. Trees should have broken the horizon. There was nothing, just falling snow and darkness layered so thick it felt solid. The footprints didn't move. They didn't change. They waited. A sudden gust knocked Evan sideways, snapping him from his trance. He staggered, caught himself against the car, and scrambled back towards the open door. His fingers fumbled with the handle, numb and clumsy. Another glance down. The footprints were closer than he remembered. He slammed the door shut and locked it, chest heaving. The storm pressed against the windows again, muffled but no less violent. Inside the car, the silence returned. Evan leaned back against the seat, shaking uncontrollably, breath ragged. His eyes stayed fixed on the windshield, on the faintly lit snow beyond. Outside, the storm continued to rage, and somewhere in that white emptiness, the disturbed snow remained, patient, deliberate, and wrong, waiting for Evan to step outside again.
Chapter 5.
Chapter 5. The footprints made no sense. Evan didn't sleep. He drifted instead, hovering in that thin, miserable space between panic and exhaustion, eyes snapping open at every imagined sound. The storm outside never truly quieted, but it softened and surged in uneven waves, as if testing his nerves rather than trying to break the car apart. When the light changed, he noticed it immediately. Not sunlight, not warmth, just a dull, gray thinning of the dark. Morning, maybe, or something pretending to be. Evan sat up slowly, joints stiff, breath shallow. His windshield was crusted with frost from the inside now, a delicate spiderweb of ice that caught the weak light and fractured it. He wiped a clear patch with his sleeve and leaned forward. The storm had eased. Snow still fell, but lazily now, drifting straight down instead of sideways. The wind had retreated to a distant moan, leaving behind a silence so complete it made his ears ring. For a moment, just a moment, relief washed through him. Then he remembered the footprints. His gaze dropped instinctively to the ground beside the car. They were still there, clearer now, perfect. Evan opened the door slowly, every movement deliberate, controlled. Cold air spilled in, but it no longer felt as violent, just heavy, expectant. He stepped out, boots crunching softly, and stood very still. The footprints circled the car in a wide ring, not close enough to brush the doors, not far enough to be accidental. Each print was evenly spaced, pressed into the snow with identical depth, as though whoever or whatever had made them weighed exactly the same with every step. Evan turned in place, following the trail around the vehicle, heart thudding harder with every foot of distance. "They didn't come from the road," he whispered. The road itself was barely visible now, a faint depression swallowed by snow, but there were no tracks leading from it, no tire marks except his own, no signs of anyone approaching from either direction. The footprints simply began, and they ended nowhere. Evan crouched beside one, studying it despite every instinct screaming at him not to. The shape was wrong. Not deformed, not monstrous, just subtly incorrect. Too long, too narrow, the toe impression slightly deeper than the heel, as if weight had shifted forward unnaturally with each step. They didn't come from the road. He followed the circle again, faster this time, boots crunching louder as panic crept back in. He searched for a break in the pattern, a scuff, a stumble, anything human. There was nothing, no hesitation, no overlap. The tracks didn't cross each other. They didn't double back. They didn't wander. They maintained the same measured distance from the car the entire way around, like the radius of a perfect wheel. Evan straightened, a chill crawling up his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. If something had been walking here, it long enough to walk around the car like this, he should have heard it. Shouldn't he? The realization hit him slowly, sinking its teeth in deep. He had heard something, crunching, measured, deliberate, not random, not the wind. Evan's gaze snapped up, scanning the distance between the footprints and the tree line. The snow there was smooth, untouched, a blank page waiting to be written on. His stomach twisted. There was no beginning to the tracks. There was no end. The circle didn't mark a journey. It marked a presence. A sudden, irrational thought surfaced, one he tried and failed to push away. What if it was still walking, not leaving new prints, just staying in place, watching? Evan retreated into the car and slammed the door shut, hands shaking as he locked it. The interior felt smaller than ever, walls closing in, glass too thin to matter. Outside, the footprints remained unchanged, perfect, patient. They didn't move closer. They didn't fade. They waited. And as Evan sat there, heart pounding, staring at that impossible ring in the snow, one terrible truth settled fully into his mind. Whatever had circled his car hadn't been lost. It hadn't been confused. It had known exactly what it was doing. And it hadn't finished. Yet.
Chapter 6.
Chapter 6. I was being watched, not hunted. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in slowly, like cold through bone. Evan sat motionless inside the car, eyes fixed on the windshield, on the pale gray world beyond it. The footprints remained unchanged outside, still, perfect, patient. Snow drifted down gently now, barely disturbing their edges. The storm had quieted enough that he could hear his own breathing again. That was what scared him most. If whatever had made those tracks wanted him dead, it wouldn't have waited for daylight. If it wanted me, I'd already be dead. The thought repeated itself, uncomfortably logical. He tested it from every angle, searching for cracks, for reassurance or denial. Nothing came. The truth sat there, heavy and undeniable. He was still alive because he was allowed to be. The cold had stopped being his primary concern. Fear rearranged his priorities with brutal efficiency. His body still ached, fingers stiff and numb, but those sensations faded into the background. His attention narrowed, sharpened. He listened. The forest remained silent. No crunch of snow, no shifting branches, no approach. Even the wind seemed hesitant now, blowing only in faint, distant sighs. Hours passed, though outside the day barely changed. The light remained flat and gray, neither morning nor afternoon, as if time itself had stalled. Evan checked the dashboard clock again. The numbers meant less every time he looked at them. He tried to distract himself by inventorying what he had left. Half a bottle of water, a protein bar crushed in the glove compartment, a phone with a dying battery and no signal. He forced himself to smile grimly. Well, at least you planned ahead. The sound of his voice startled him. It felt wrong to speak aloud, as though noise itself might draw attention. He stopped, listening again. Nothing. And yet, the feeling remained. The sense of being observed. Not from one direction, not from a single point, from everywhere and nowhere at once. Evan's skin prickled beneath his coat, a low-level awareness that refused to fade. He glanced at the side mirrors. Snow, empty road, white void. The rearview mirror showed only the fogged outline of his own eyes staring back at him, wide, dark, ringed with exhaustion. He looked away quickly. If it wanted me, I'd already be dead. The phrase became a grim comfort, a twisted kind of reassurance. He clung to it, even as it twisted further. If he wasn't being hunted, then why was it here? Evan replayed the night in his mind, over and over. The measured crunching, the careful spacing of the prints, the way they circled the car without ever touching it. There had been no rush, no urgency. Whatever had walked around him had taken its time. He imagined it pausing, standing just beyond the reach of the headlights, head tilted slightly, listening to him breathe, learning the shape of the car, the sound of his movements, the rhythm of his fear. That thought made his stomach churn. He shifted in his seat, trying to ease the stiffness in his legs. The movement felt too loud, too noticeable. He stilled again almost immediately, heart pounding. Another hour passed, or two. Evan dozed briefly, exhaustion pulling him under despite his fear. When he jolted awake, panic surged fresh and sharp, his body screaming that something had changed. Nothing had. The footprints remained exactly as they were, but the feeling of being watched had intensified. It pressed in from all sides now, a constant weight on his chest.
Evan forced himself to look directly at the tracks again, studying them with renewed attention. They were closer to the car than he remembered. He checked himself, shook his head. No, they hadn't moved. The spacing was the same, the distance unchanged. So why did it feel like they were closer? Because he was. Not physically, but mentally, emotionally. He was running out of places to hide inside his own head. A sound drifted faintly through the stillness. Not crunching, not footsteps. Breathing. Evan's heart slammed violently. He froze, barely daring to inhale. The sound was subtle, almost imagined, but it carried a rhythm that didn't belong to the wind. Slow, measured, patient. He strained to locate it, eyes darting between windows, mirrors, shadows. The sound faded as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving only silence behind. Evan exhaled shakily. "Get it together," he whispered, voice trembling. But deep down he knew better. Whatever was out there wasn't trying to scare him into making a mistake. It was watching how he reacted, how long he could endure, how fear changed him. "If it wanted me, I'd already be dead." The truth twisted again, sharpening into something far worse. It didn't want him dead. It wanted him aware. Evan curled his hands into fists, nails biting into his palms. The car no longer felt like protection. It felt like a stage, a place where he was meant to be seen. Outside, the footprints waited. Inside, Evan waited too. And somewhere beyond the tree line, unseen, unheard, but unmistakably present, something waited with him, learning exactly how long a human could survive, knowing he was not alone.
Chapter 7.
Chapter 7. The tree line was too close. Evan noticed the forest when it moved. Not all at once, not clearly, just enough to make his eyes refocus. He had been staring past the windshield for so long that the white space beyond the glass had begun to feel flat, like a painted backdrop. Snow drifted steadily, lazily now, settling into the footprints and softening their edges. The world felt paused, quiet in a way that pressed on his ears. Then something shifted at the edge of that stillness. Evan leaned forward slightly, breath catching. The tree line was closer than it had been. Not by much, a few yards maybe, enough that the dark vertical shapes of trunks were more defined now, their outlines sharper against the gray sky. He stared hard, heart beating faster. Had it always been that close? He searched his memory, replaying the scene from earlier, the distance, the emptiness between the car and the forest. He couldn't be sure anymore. Time had blurred too much. Fear had rewritten details without asking. Evan swallowed. The forest didn't feel like a collection of trees anymore. It felt like a boundary, a line drawn deliberately between what he understood and what he didn't. He cracked the window just enough to listen. The cold slipped in immediately, sharp and biting. The smell of snow and pine followed, clean, damp, faintly sweet. Beneath it all was something else, a deeper, older scent. Earth, rot, the slow breath of something that had been alive long before roads existed. Evan closed the window again. Nothing ever stepped out, but something always moved. The phrase repeated in his mind, unwelcome and insistent. He saw it again, a flicker of motion between two trunks, too smooth to be falling snow, too deliberate to be wind. Evan's eyes locked onto the spot, muscles tensing. Nothing emerged. The trees stood still, branches heavy and bowed beneath fresh snow. Shadows layered over shadows, depth folding in on itself. It was impossible to tell where one trunk ended and another began. Nothing ever stepped out, but something always moved. A faint sound reached him then. Not a footstep. A shift. Snow sliding off a branch somewhere deep in the forest, the soft whisper of displaced powder. Evan held his breath, waiting for the follow-up sound that never came. His imagination filled the silence eagerly, too eagerly. He shook his head once, hard, as if to clear it. "You're doing this to yourself," he muttered. "It's just trees." But the words rang hollow even to him. The forest felt attentive. Evan's eyes traced the line where snow met shadow, where the open space around the car ended and the trees began. He noticed things he hadn't before. The way the snow beneath the tree line was uneven, subtly disturbed. The way some branches swayed while others remained perfectly still. Patterns emerged the longer he watched, patterns that vanished the moment he tried to focus on them. Nothing ever stepped out, but something always moved. He flinched as a sudden gust of wind rushed through the trees, branches creaking softly. Snow cascaded down in small avalanches, briefly revealing darker shapes beneath before covering them again. For a moment, just a moment, Evan thought he saw a gap where there shouldn't have been one, a space between trunks that seemed too wide, too tall, not empty, occupied. His heart slammed violently. He leaned closer to the glass, breath fogging it instantly. The shape was gone. The forest returned to its patient stillness, as if nothing had happened at all. Evan laughed under his breath, the sound thin and brittle. "That's it. I'm officially losing it." But the laughter didn't ease the tension coiled in his chest. He became acutely aware of how exposed the car was, how small, how temporary. The snow around the tires had piled higher now, pressing close. The footprints, still visible, felt like markers rather than evidence. The forest didn't need to cross that open space. It already had reach. Evan noticed movement again, higher this time, a branch swaying against the wind's direction, a shadow shifting where no shadow should move. His eyes locked on one window to another, tracking disturbances that never resolved into anything solid. Nothing ever stepped out, but something always moved. The phrase felt less like a thought now and more like a rule he didn't understand yet. The cold deepened inside the car, seeping through layers of clothing and resolve. Evan hugged himself tighter, shoulders hunched, eyes never leaving the tree line. He wondered how long he'd been staring at it. Minutes? Hours? The forest stared back. A sudden sharp crack echoed through the trees. Evan jumped, heart lurching painfully. The sound was unmistakable, wood breaking under pressure, a branch snapping somewhere deep within the tree line. He waited. Nothing followed. No footsteps, no approach, no retreat. Just silence. His breath trembled as he exhaled. The sound of the crack replayed in his head, looping, each repetition louder than the last. Whatever had caused it didn't care whether he heard it or not. That was the worst part. The forest didn't feel hostile. It felt curious. Evan slowly turned his head away from the window, needing a break from the oppressive presence beyond the glass. The interior of the car felt smaller than ever, walls pressing in, ceiling too low. When he looked back at the tree line, his stomach dropped. It was closer again. Not dramatically, not enough to be certain, but enough to make his pulse race and his mouth dry. Nothing ever stepped out, but something was closing the distance, very carefully, very patiently. Evan pressed his forehead against the cold glass, eyes wide, breath shallow. The car sat alone in the open, surrounded by snow and silence and watching trees. And deep in the forest, just beyond the edge of certainty, something moved, never revealing itself, never crossing the line, content with letting Evan understand one terrifying truth. The tree line wasn't creeping closer. It had always been right there, waiting for him to notice.
Chapter 8.
Chapter 8. It learned my routine. Evan began to mark time by his own habits. Not by the clock, it had stopped meaning anything, but by the small, repeated rituals he clung to in order to stay sane. He checked the tree line, he checked the mirrors, he checked the footprints. He counted his breaths. He closed his eyes for exactly 10 seconds, then opened them again. Over and over. At first, the world followed predictable rules. When he looked away from the footprints and looked back, they were the same. When he glanced toward the forest, it remained just beyond that invisible line of safety. Nothing crossed, nothing advanced. Then, the pattern broke. Evan noticed it during one of his checks. He leaned forward, wiped frost from the windshield, and scanned the ground beside the driver's door. The footprints were closer. Not by much. A half step, maybe. The kind of change you could convince yourself wasn't real. Evan blinked hard and leaned closer to the glass. His heart began to pound. He checked the others, passenger side, rear, front. The ring had tightened subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if the circle had drawn a slow breath inward while he wasn't looking. "It's the snow," he whispered. "Drifting, that's all." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Snow softened edges. It didn't move patterns inward with precision. Evan sat back, chest tight, forcing himself to breathe. He waited. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. The storm remained quiet. The forest stayed still. Relief crept in, thin and fragile. He laughed softly, shaking his head. "You're cracking," he muttered. "That's all this is." He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, his gaze went immediately, instinctively to the tree line. Something shifted. A shape slid behind a trunk, too tall and narrow to be a branch falling. Evan's breath hitched sharply. He leaned forward, eyes locked on the spot. Nothing emerged. His attention snapped back to the footprints. They were closer again. Evan's pulse roared in his ears. He checked his watch out of habit, even though it no longer told him anything useful. He tried to remember how long his eyes had been closed. 5 seconds? 10? Had he fallen asleep? Doubt wormed its way into his thoughts, burrowing deep. His memory felt unreliable now, details blurring at the edges. He replayed the moment again and again, unable to trust what he thought he'd seen. It knew when I would look. The realization crept in slowly, settling into place with sickening certainty. The changes only happened when he wasn't watching him. Evan tested the idea. He stared at the footprints without blinking, eyes burning, jaw clenched. He didn't look away, didn't check the mirrors, didn't glance at the tree line. Nothing changed. Minutes dragged by, his eyes watering, his head throbbing. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He turned his head, just for a moment, to flex his neck. When he looked back, his stomach dropped. Another half step closer. Evan recoiled, gasping, hand slapping against the door. "No, no, no!" It knew when I would look. The pattern was undeniable now. The thing outside wasn't moving randomly. It wasn't drifting. It was timing itself. Learning. Evan's routine had become a signal. He tried to change it.
He looked at the footprints out of sequence, forcing himself to glance away unpredictably. He stared at the ceiling, then the floor, then the mirrors, then the tree line, trying to break whatever rhythm he'd fallen into. The footprints still moved, always closer, always when he wasn't looking directly at them. Panic bloomed hot and sharp in his chest. He began to question everything. Had the footprints always been that close? Had the tree line always loomed like that? Were the sounds he heard real or echoes of his own fear? He laughed again, louder this time, the sound cracking halfway through. "You're not real," he told the empty car. "You can't be." The laughter died quickly. Outside, the forest responded with silence, so complete it felt intentional. Evan's thoughts spiraled. He replayed the night from the beginning, searching for missed clues. The engine dying, the crunching footsteps, the perfect circle, the waiting. Had this been happening long before he noticed? Had it been closer all along? "It knew when I would look." The phrase repeated endlessly now, looping through his mind, eroding his grip on reality. He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to shut it out. When he opened them, he screamed. One footprint stood directly beside the driver's door. Not touching it, not smudged, just there. Evan scrambled backward in his seat, heart slamming violently. He stared at the mark in the snow, unable to breathe, unable to think. The rest of the circle remained intact, but this one stood apart, closer than all the others. A message. A test. The forest beyond it remained still, tree line looming, shadows layered thickly between the trunks. Nothing stepped out. Nothing had to. Evan's chest heaved as he fought for control, tears stinging his eyes from fear and exhaustion. His routines had failed him, his logic had betrayed him. The thing outside didn't need to rush. It had all the time in the world. And it was no longer just watching him survive. It was watching him unravel. As Evan sat there, shaking, staring at the single footprint inches from the door, one final crushing thought settled into place. This wasn't a hunt. It was an experiment. And Evan was the only subject.
Chapter 8.
Chapter 9. Morning didn't mean safety. Morning came quietly. No sunrise broke the horizon. No warmth followed the light. The gray simply thinned, as if the night had grown tired of pretending it could last forever. Snow still fell, but gently now, drifting straight down in slow, lazy patterns. Evan noticed the change without relief. Daylight was supposed to mean safety, visibility, rescue, the end of imagining things in the dark. Instead, dread settled deeper into his chest. He sat rigid in the driver's seat, eyes burning, throat dry, staring out through a windshield webbed with frost. He scraped a small circle clear with his sleeve and leaned forward. The storm had eased. The world had not. The footprints were everywhere now. Not just the careful ring around the car, not just the single print near the door that had shattered his routines. There were more, dozens of them, pressed into the snow beyond the headlight's reach, overlapping, branching, crisscrossing in patterns that made his stomach turn. They hadn't rushed, they had multiplied. Evan opened the door slowly, the hinges creaking in protest. Cold air slid inside, less violent than before, but no less sharp. He stepped out, boots sinking deep, and stood very still. The silence was immense. Without the storm's roar, the forest's presence became overwhelming. Every sound felt magnified. the soft hiss of falling snow, the distant creak of frozen branches, the quiet, relentless beat of his own heart. He turned slowly, scanning the ground. Tracks circled the car in layered rings now, some shallow, some deeper, some partially filled with fresh snow. They varied slightly in size, but not enough to suggest different beings, just adjustments, as if the same thing had walked differently at different times. Evan swallowed hard. The tracks stretched outward toward the tree line, stopping just short of it. None crossed into the forest, none came from it. They existed in the open space, waiting. A wave of dizziness washed over him. He braced a hand against the hood, cold metal biting through his glove. The car felt impossibly small now, a single object surrounded by evidence of prolonged attention. "How long?" he whispered. The forest did not answer. Daylight revealed details the night had hidden. The snow near the tree line was uneven, disturbed in subtle ways, compressed patches, faint impressions that never quite resolved into footprints. The trees themselves seemed closer together than before, their shadows overlapping, tangling. Evan felt exposed in a way darkness had almost mercifully concealed. He backed toward the open door, eyes never leaving the tracks. The moment he was inside, he shut and locked it, breath coming fast and shallow. The clock blinked weakly. 10:41 a.m. He stared at it, unblinking. Morning. No rescue, no plow, no distant engine sounds, just silence and watching trees. Evan laughed softly, a hollow sound. "Figures," he murmured. The storm had done something worse than trap him. It had given him hope. He looked again at the footprints closest to the car. Some were fresh, their edges sharp. Others were softened by time, layers of intention pressed into the snow. The thing out there hadn't waited passively. It had been busy. The realization came slowly, heavy and crushing. The storm wasn't keeping it away, it was keeping it hidden. Evan's breath hitched. He replayed the night with this new understanding, the whiteout, the blindness, the way the world had narrowed to the car and nothing else. The storm hadn't protected him, it had concealed everything he wasn't meant to see. Now, in daylight, the truth lay exposed, and it was worse than anything he'd imagined. Movement flickered near the tree line. Evan stiffened, heart lurching violently. He leaned forward, hands gripping the seat. A shadow slid between trunks, not fast, not slow, deliberate. Snow did not fall there, branches did not sway. Something passed through the space and left it changed. Nothing stepped out, but something always moved. The phrase echoed through his mind, stripped of abstraction now, anchored in reality. The forest felt closer still, its edge pressing toward the car without crossing that invisible boundary. Evan pressed his forehead against the cold glass, eyes wide, breath shallow. "Why?" he whispered. The question felt childish the moment it left him. The answer didn't matter. What mattered was intention. The tracks hadn't multiplied randomly. They weren't signs of confusion or hunger or desperation. They were records, notes written into the snow. The thing out there had been mapping him, his fear, his movements, his limits. Daylight hadn't changed its behavior. It had simply removed the last illusion that this was an accident. Evan's hands trembled as he pulled his coat tighter, as if layers could protect him from understanding. The storm was a curtain. Now it was gone, and there was nothing between him and the truth except glass and habit and dwindling time. Outside, the footprints waited. Inside, Evan waited too. and as the gray daylight stretched on, unmoving and indifferent, he understood with brutal clarity that morning didn't mean safety. It meant exposure. It meant whatever had been watching him all night no longer needed to hide. And it meant the final decision, whatever it was closer than it had ever been.
Chapter 10.
Chapter 10. I survived, but it didn't leave. The sound came from far away. At first, Evan thought he was imagining it, another trick of exhaustion, another echo shaped by hope. A low rumble, barely distinct from the wind, vibrating through the snow-packed ground. He stilled, breath caught. The sound came again, mechanical, heavy, real. Evan surged forward in his seat, heart slamming painfully as he wiped frost from the windshield with frantic motions. The gray world beyond the glass shuddered, then bloomed with movement. Lights, yellow, rotating, cutting through the haze of falling snow. A snowplow. The relief hit him like vertigo, his vision blurred, eyes burning as something dangerously close to laughter bubbled up in his throat. He fumbled with the door, hands clumsy and shaking, and shoved it open. Cold air rushed in, but he barely felt it. He stumbled out of the car, waving his arms wildly, shouting words he didn't remember choosing. The plow slowed, tires crunching, engine growling loud and glorious in the quiet world. A second vehicle followed behind it, another truck, hazard lights flashing red and blue. Human voices shouted back, concerned, confused, alive. Evan dropped to his knees in the snow before he realized what he was doing. He didn't care. He laughed then, loud, broken, half sobbing, pressing his gloved hands into the ground as if to prove it was solid. They reached him quickly. Questions overlapped. Hands gripped his shoulders, steadying him. Someone wrapped a blanket around him that smelled of diesel and old coffee. "You're safe now," a voice said. "You're okay." Evan nodded because that was easier than speaking. As they helped him to his feet, as they guided him toward the warmth of the truck, he looked back. The car sat where he'd left it, half buried in snow, small and insignificant against the open white. The footprints around it were still visible, though softened now by daylight and disturbance. Except for one thing. The tracks stopped at the tree line. Not faded, not scattered, stopped. Evan squinted, heart tightening as he focused on them. Every footprint at the edge of the forest faced outward, toward the road, toward the car, toward him. None led back into the trees. A rescue worker followed his gaze. "Looks like some animal tracks," he said casually. "Deer, maybe." Evan didn't respond. Animals fled toward cover. These had been watching the open. They loaded him into the truck, wrapped him tighter, offered him water that burned his throat going down. The engine roared to life, and the vehicle lurched forward, tires finding traction at last. As they pulled away, Evan watched the tree line recede through the rear window. He didn't feel relief. He felt watched. The forest shrank into the distance, shadows folding back into each other, until it was nothing more than a dark smear against the white. The road reappeared, signs, familiar bends, civilization creeping back in. But something fundamental had shifted. At the station, they asked him questions, took his statement, checked him for frostbite, wrapped him in more blankets. Someone joked weakly about bad weather and worse luck. Evan answered when he could. He didn't mention the footprints. He didn't mention the waiting. He didn't mention the way the storm felt intentional. They wouldn't have understood. Days later, at home, warmth still felt wrong, silence too clean, the walls too close. He slept in short, shallow bursts, waking at the smallest sound, heart racing,
breath shallow. Snow fell again that week. Evan stood at his window, watching it drift down in slow, gentle sheets, covering the world in white. He felt the old tension creep back in, coiling tight in his chest. He imagined footprints forming in the yard, imagined them stopping just short of the light. He told himself he was safe, but safety wasn't the same as absence. The thing in the forest hadn't chased him. It hadn't needed to. As the snow continued to fall, Evan finally understood what had been happening from the beginning, why the circle had been perfect, why the waiting had been so patient, why rescue came when it did. The storm hadn't trapped him, it had prepared him. The footprints hadn't marked confinement, they had marked selection. Evan turned away from the window, heart heavy with a truth he couldn't escape. He had survived, but it hadn't left, because it was never trapped with him at all. He was bait.
People think survival horror is about endurance, about cold, hunger, time. But real survival horror is about realization. The moment you understand the danger isn't trying to kill you, it's trying to know you. I made it home. I thawed out. Life moved on. But every winter, when the snow falls heavy and the world grows quiet, I remember the footprints that never led away. Because some things don't chase, they wait. And if you've ever felt watched in the silence, if you've ever sensed something just beyond the edge of the light, then listen closely. The storm isn't what you should fear. It's what the storm allows to step closer. If this story stayed with you, don't ignore it. Subscribe, stay vigilant, and never assume you're alone just because you can't see anyone there.